3 o'clock. I believe we have a quorum, so I will go ahead and kick things off. Paula, roll call.
Jorge Charnico.
Here.
Lee Peoples.
Here.
Anthony Black.
Here.
Dylan Bradway. Donna Cervantes. Matt Guillory. Tyler Holmes.
Here.
Ben Sellers. And James Barnum. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Everybody should have received the minutes in their packet. Does anybody have any comments or modifications that need to be made to those? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. Second.
Great. We will move on to, oh, sorry. I do that every time. So let's vote on it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, opposite sign. Great. Now we can move on. Cases withdrawn, we have one. It's UDCA 17-00037 at 610 Northwest 23rd. We have no continuance request during this meeting. We have one item on the consent docket. Michael, could you just give us an overview?
Yeah, this is a proposal for a mural that runs the length of the south wall of the building at 2512 South Harvey. The materials are in your packet. The applicant is not here, so you may want to move that onto later on the agenda, or if you're comfortable with acting on it now.
If it's, we've got,
Oh. Okay. All right.
okay. Come on up. If it's on the consent docket, we can pretty much just move
Unless
forward.
there's any
you want
questions
to
so the commission
specifically-
has that they want to talk about it or discuss it or ask the applicant any questions, you can
So
ask for approval of the consent docket.
does anybody on the commission have any questions in regards to the consent docket? Does anybody in the audience, do you want to speak to the commission?
It was not necessary.
Okay.
I can't if you want me to, whatever you need,
If there are no questions, we can go ahead and we'll vote on it, on the consent docket. Do I have a motion to approve the consent docket?
Motion to approve the consent docket as stated.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Opposed, opposite sign. Motion is approved. We've got one case for individual consideration. That's UDCA 18-00001 at 624 Northwest 17th. Michael, could you give us an overview of that case?
Yeah, this is an application for a three-story single-family residence on the south side of Northwest 7th Street between Lee and Dewey. We've reviewed the proposed case and determined that it's in compliance with all the applicable development regulations and design guidelines. However, we have highlighted two sections in the staff report, or two issues in the staff report, one being the compatibility of the project with the height of a neighboring residence. And basically the consensus there is that the proposed structure does not exceed the maximum stories, nor does it exceed the maximum building height for the district, and therefore we are recommending approval of the project at 3 stories. The second item has to do with the control joints, and the Commission's familiar with the guideline that talks about control joints at no greater than 3 feet vertically and 5 feet horizontally. This applicant has chosen to provide a project that has control joints that are 12 feet apart both directions, width and height. And they're making the case that it's compatible with the modern or contemporary style design of the house, and therefore that's the reason they're asking to have that type of control joint design system. Do want to point out that you have a memo that was distributed to you this afternoon, or actually earlier today, that has a revised site plan for this case. The site plan that's in your packet is in error, shows the wrong setback in the front of the property. The one that has been provided for you at the dais today shows the house being moved 3 feet south on the property so that it does fall into the range of setbacks along Northwest 7th Street. That completes our presentation. We're prepared to respond to any questions the commission may have.
Does anybody in the commission have any questions for Michael? Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on behalf of the project? Okay, does anybody have any questions for the owner or the architect?
I have one question for the architect.
If you could, please sign in. I did. Okay, great, and state your name and address.
Elisa Weatherman, architect.
So my question is mainly in regards to, I noticed that you had a rooftop structure that was, is it the intent of the owner to actually walk on the TPO membrane?
Not on the front of the house. On the back of the house, there will be a deck.
Okay.
And it will be a track surface over a TPO.
Okay, because in the documents I was looking at it, and it looked to me like in some areas that they might actually use the TPO surface as the weather's. Just
Not
wanted to
intent,
confirm.
no.
Okay, very good. I don't have any further questions.
I have a question about the setbacks.
Yes.
So the staff report and attachments back, we have this, looks like an older
It was, and
picture here, and so you're measuring the closest to the street at 37 feet.
that is correct.
But I can't tell because of the way this is, it has a shading there because of the shadow. If the 37 feet
Is from
is
curb.
from the, well, it's from the curb, but I'm familiar with that house, and it has a planter and some other things that are not structural, and I can't tell if you are going to
It would have been
just
to the
planter
face
or to the face
of the house. And I can also tell you that on my way here, just to verify, the house that we're building next to, I took a tape while I was there. I measured to their front porch, which is also their overhang with a column. They're exactly 37 feet. So we'd be right in line with their house as far as their roof goes. You know, of course, their building structures behind it. But we're besides the one down the road, that is at 37 feet.
And Michael, does staff, do you all verify, or you just go by what is submitted? Or in terms
We
of setback?
don't go out in the field and measure, no.
You're deviating from the requirements for control joints. Based on the stucco system you're using, what's the manufacturer recommend?
I just went by the industry standard because, you know, as the stucco industry standard, I went by their rule of 144 square feet or 12 by 12.
Okay.
So
Are there any other questions?
Do we have any more detailed renderings available of what the finished product will look like?
we do not.
Can you speak a little bit to what it would look like in terms of color? I mean, there's not a lot here to be able to tell what,
Well, that's because it's white. It's very simple. That was what the owners requested. They liked, was the simplicity of the design and keeping it with just, it's a white stucco finish with the black frames and just a little bit of detail with the black. So it's quite simple.
Any follow-up questions, Matt?
no, I mean, I would like to see a little bit more clear representation of what the, I mean, the plans are one thing, but a rendering of what the exterior is going to look like is something that is helpful.
Yeah, staff doesn't require renderings. The guidelines don't have
Yeah.
color as part of the criteria.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Okay, is there anybody in the audience that would like to comment on this project? Come on out.
Brian Fitzsimmons, 719 North Francis. I'm not going to get into the scale and mass issues, but I do want to make sure the setback is dealt with correctly. I look back through previous cases, and I don't disagree that 37 is correct relative to the curb. However, the property line, I believe on the site plan, even revised submitted, is incorrect. The neighboring houses to the east of this, even with the 37 setback, they're roughly 22 and a half feet from the property line, not 8 feet. And so it needs to be tied to something accurate. Also, if you take 8 plus the length of the house, you have a 137-foot lot, so this is an inaccurate site plan. I'm fine with 37 if there's some sort of condition that the 37 is tied to the actual curb and not the arbitrary property line on the drawing. And it would probably, just doing the math, it would put it probably about 4 feet from the alley rather than the 16.
Michael, do you have any feedback on that?
We can work with the applicant to make sure that the front property line is accurately depicted on the site plan before we stamp the plans approved.
But the revised site plan dimensions from the curb to face of house.
Yes, it does.
37 feet.
That's correct.
But you're saying that doesn't square, the overall running dimensions don't square with
Yeah, the remaining
lot.
left over would not be 16 on the back, and plus 121 plus 16 is 137 when the lot is 140. So something is, when it's built, it needs to be built in the correct place, and a typical contractor will go by the stake lines of the survey. And I'm pretty sure this is not an actual survey because all of our city is actually on a skew rather than a perfect rectangle. So,
But there's no issue. So just to confirm what I thought I heard you say, you were comfortable with those adjustments, and Michael is comfortable with reviewing those as part of their...
Yeah, we'll make sure before we stamp the plans approved that we've done our due diligence on making sure the property lines are shown correctly.
But I would ask that whoever makes the motion articulate that as a condition.
Right.
What percentage of the lot will the house take up? The actual footprint of the house, what percentage of the lot is that?
So are there any questions for Brian before he leaves?
Nobody's done any of the calculations for that because there's no lot coverage maximum in the DTD1 district, so
Okay.
there's no standard to comply with from that standpoint, but I'd say it's fair to say it's probably close to 80%.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak to this project? Commissioners, are there any other questions?
I have maybe another question for the architect. I have some concerns about the scale of the project, and staff brought this up in terms of stories of the building, but did you give any consideration to the scale of it because of the square footage size as it relates to the house immediately to the east? There's a single-family house across the street. And to me, at over 5,700 square feet, it seems out of scale with those other houses. And so do you have anything to say to that, any consideration for that?
It's hard because there's vacant lots out there, and there's a bunch of older homes from the early 1900s, and then there's a whole bunch of newer homes. On the south side of the street, once you pass the single story next door to the east, there's 3 homes that are quite large. And then across the street on the north side of 7th at the corner of Dewey is another large-scale Mediterranean home that you may recall that we had a lot of discussion about in terms of mass and height and so on and so forth. It's hard to determine which houses to use when you're trying to gauge compatibility, but we did discuss in detail in the staff report the house next door. Frankly, if the house next door had built to code, it would be 2 stories, as opposed to the 1 story they did build by getting a variance. And that's the house we felt was the most concerning in terms of scale and compatibility, was that 1 single-story house next door. Frankly, we feel that aside from that 1 house, it is taller, obviously, and both in stories and in height. But in terms of other homes that are in their neighborhood, it's very much in character with the other houses that are around there that have been built in the last 3 or 4 years. So that was pretty much the extent of our review of the compatibility of the houses in the neighborhood.
Well, just by square footage, did you look at what the square footage of other single-family houses are?
No.
I mean, from my memory, it's over 5,700. It would be quite, by many square feet above all the existing single families. And I know that the one to the east is 1,800, so you're looking at 3 times square footage. The single family across the street, it would also be 3 times the square footage of that. So, you know, stories and height is one way to get at it, but I think just the bulk of it, you know, the fact that it, there was one that we approved last year across the street that's 3 stories, and it carries most of its mass on the first floor, and then when you get up to the second floor, it steps in, and then the third floor is even smaller, and I thought, you know, we did a good job with that.
This floor, the 3rd floor, does step back as well. If you, inside, I mean, we are going back 20-plus feet to set it back. The house that is to the east of the 1-story house, as well as a 3-story house, it has its mass on the 1-story side. Well, I know they did a deck, but they still have that 3-story mass up there. It is pulled back like ours will be, but it was still there. So I didn't feel like we were out of scale for what my clients want. So.
The point that Commissioner Gilroy brought up as well, that taking up almost all of the lot, that's another thing that I think goes to scale.
I think the fact that it's a giant white box doesn't help the scale, because as I envision this house, it will seem a lot bigger than it really is, because it's just the big...
Until the next house that builds next to it is tall and takes up its space.
To add to that point, so just to verify, it is primarily all white stucco, and you have the pre-finished black metal coping. Those are the 2 exterior materials beyond just glazing and then the storefront. Yeah. So that is probably a more unprecedented thing that I can see consistent with the area, is there's typically more materials used that I've seen, and I think that I would agree that different types of material, even if it's a soffit, definitely breaking up some of the walls just aesthetically, I think it would enhance the project quite a bit. So it's pretty monolithic, and you know, if it was a material like brick, it could be a different story, but stucco is even a rather inexpensive material that, especially for that long of a facade, even on a construction level, it's probably not going to be the most attractive wall, because that's just kind of how stucco can be done. It's very, it shows every flaw within, so, and the idea is to make it look as simple as possible. I think making it this monolithic may actually go against what you're trying to do, so I think a variation of material could break that up and make it look a lot better. So
it is not an option with my client. Sorry.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments from the commission?
The owner also is the general contractor, so he will have some stake in how his finishes are done and done well, if that's helpful. You know what I mean? It's a pride thing, you know, it won't be shoddily done because he's going to live in it. Okay.
Do we have a motion from the commission? Nothing? Okay. Are there any questions that would help drive the commission toward a motion? Well, I don't know what to do. So I need somebody to make a motion either way.
So I know exactly where you are right now and the frustration of that. I'm glad it's not me. I'm not making a motion. I don't have any specific question that's going to help me. My issue right now is that this is going to be a large, potentially monolithic box that's sitting there, and that I know what y'all are going for, and it might be fantastic. It is very hard for me to tell whether or not this is achieving that or missing that, because there's just not enough presented here to give me the detail to really envision what the final product is going to look like.
Alyssa, before they motion, do you want to think about doing a rendering or updating any materials and coming back and having them continue it to the March meeting? Or do you want a motion up or down on what's here?
If the committee votes no, then you can appeal that to the Board of Adjustment.
Or you could file another application with a different design.
A new application, presumably for a different design.
Is there any way that I could get a rendering done and supply it to, is there any way to get it to them? 'Cause I mean, without having to wait another month for y'all to look at it? No? Up to you.
So it seems like we're tied up on reference 7200.1.g, the development pattern.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be an issue for me. I mentioned the scale issue here in relation to the other houses, and the guideline you reference talks about adjacent uses, and if we look at the adjacent use, that 1,800 square foot house, I just don't see how this, as it is now, is anywhere close to in scale. And Commissioner Gilroy brought up the architectural detailing. Others have mentioned that. So, yeah, for me, that's an issue.
Yeah, I made the point earlier. I think the house will look larger than it really is, just because it is so stark and lacks any sort of distractions. A little bit of more detail would help take your eye off the mass.
Okay, maybe you're not seeing it. The front of the house, it's like 50% glazing. We have overhangs over each level of the windows. Each one of those soffits has a cedar soffit. It has can lights. I mean, it has some depth to it, so it's not just a box. I mean, maybe we're not seeing it.
Well, I think to Matt's point, though, again, when I'm looking at this,
Right.
and particularly when you go to the side elevation, it's a huge box. The details that you're talking about
Right.
are there, but when I look at this, I just see a giant white box.
Until the next house comes in and builds right beside it, and it's not there anymore.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, but, I mean, we're not looking for a reason to object to this. It's that there's not enough here for me to really tell any of the detail that we're talking about in terms of what we are approving. I like the concept of what y'all are going for, and I think you probably achieve it. We just can't really tell from what's been presented here. I can't, at least. I mean,
Okay.
I think one of the things that might help, and you mentioned just now cedar soffits, which I didn't get. and
Okay.
Maybe I missed it in this. The other thing is that when we're looking at this from straight on, we're getting the full
Right.
3 stories as a flat plane.
Right.
Where in reality, at human scale,
People see it
one,
differently.
the cedar soffits are going to start to break up,
Right.
which we can't see.
Right.
And the fact that that third story is stepped back from a perspective standpoint, it's going to drop off, especially from the street. I agree, a perspective would help. It would definitely sell it. The other thing is that right now the windows are reading as white on this box. And so if it was a
Right.
perspective that showed true material scale, it would pull some of that off.
Okay.
I don't particularly have an exception to the property next door, because if it's existing non-compliant, then we're evaluating it against something that we would not be doing
Right.
had it been maybe developed according to the standards. But it is being shown on a paper as an element in space with no reference to anything else, so it's making
Okay.
it very difficult to be able to see how it actually does site.
Right.
So maybe being able to see how it would site with respect to adjacent properties would be helpful.
if I may, I would agree completely with that. I didn't realize there was cedar on here either, and the fact that I think we need more detail. The fact that at least a few of us up here, we're not even realizing what all the
Okay.
materials being used, I think that's an issue. And if we can continue for 1 month and come back with more detail and show the finishes and show the materials that you're using, we can really know what we're evaluating more clearly at that point.
Okay.
I don't think cedar's referenced it anywhere in the drawings.
Okay. Then I may have missed that, sorry.
I've looked.
Okay.
So would it,
So, okay. All right. Continue.
so you want a continuance until next month? In order for it to be submitted next month, when would it need to be into your office?
Next Tuesday or Wednesday?
A color rendering.
I'll work with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have a motion to move this to the next?
Motion to continue?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, continuance is granted. We'll see you next month. We don't have any additional cases for individual consideration, and we don't have any other business. Communications, in your packet, the commissioner should have received the administrative approval report. If there are no questions, we can move forward. Are there any questions in regards to the administrative report? Anything noteworthy, Michael, that you want to bring to our attention?
Item 3 involves the reconstruction of the belfry and a new steeple at the church. They're in Cottage District at 7th and Lee, I believe it is. So I think that's pretty interesting.
What was that church going to be used for again?
I'm sorry?
Is it still going to be a church?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Most everything else is pretty standard run-of-the-mill type stuff that we do. So.
Okay, and I failed to do this, but I wanted to welcome Anthony Blatt. He's coming to us from the DDRC. He's been appointed by the mayor, so welcome. Are there any comments from the planning department staff?
Yes, I will introduce Jennifer Swan, who's sitting here with Paula. Jennifer just started this week as our new administrative coordinator. She will probably spell Paula on occasion, because Paula is allowed to take time off. But she is sitting here learning the ropes.
Welcome.
Any other comments from staff? Comments from commission members?
So with respect to that last submission, can you work to get the site dimensional items
Yeah,
clarified as well?
that plus the renderings will be the focus of our work with the applicant on that case.
Thank you.
Any other commission comments? All right, the next meeting is Wednesday, March 28th. Applications must be submitted to staff by 4 p.m. Tuesday, February 27th. Revisions and information on continued projects are to be submitted by March 6, 2018. I'm sorry. Come on up.
My name is Kevin Thurman. I live at 9th and Chartel, and I would like to make a comment about the finial that they're going to put on the church and the weather vane.
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have...
Yeah, sure. Because the way I understand it, that they're going to replicate the original steeple and the weather vane.
Yeah, that's correct.
In 2008, when they tore the steeple and the weather vane off, me and my wife picked it up off the curb because it was just out for trash, and we've had it in our backyard since that time. The preacher from the church came over and an architect from ADG and basically said that they wanted to put that back on top of the church. And I said, that's all well and fine with me, but now that I see that it's going to be a rendering, I would just like to get it on record that I loaned that steeple to them instead of giving it to them, because I would very much like it back to keep it with the neighborhood. And that's all I'd like to say, to get it on record.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you sign in?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So unless there are any other comments, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.